I'm Andre J, and welcome to another episode of Video Synthesis Tarot, an ongoing show where I talk about how we can use nonverbal communication cues that we learn from tarot decks in order for inspiration to find inspiration in composing video feedback and video synthesis landscapes. Today you will notice that I have what may be possibly the worst lighting scenario I have done for one of these yet. Work in progress. I'm making something happen. I mean, I personally can't really stand like direct white lights, so this is sort of the best I can do in terms of like making things feel like reasonably well lit, and also not giving myself a migraine. But yeah, so you can see the cards that we have here today. We've got Virtue, which is the Three of Wands. And then we have two of the Trump cards. We have the Priestess and Art. Art, this is the Thoth deck. This was renamed from what was called Temperance in the older decks, and the reason they did that is because the basic concept of temperance had kind of evolved enough that the original meaning of temperance didn't really seem to be relevant in the context of like where people were at in like the mid 20th century, and art seemed to express the concept more fully. And we'll go into that more once we get to that card. We'll start one at a time. So the first card we have is Virtue, and let me try to get it so it's not directly in the shadow of the camera, which unfortunately makes it kind of staged awkwardly, but here we are. This is the light I have chosen. Virtue is the Three of Wands. We know that wands are expressions of our will in the material world. They can sometimes be seen to represent like intelligence or agenda or kind of like your projection of will in the world. These three wands together form a nice little triform cross. We can see in the background that there is sort of a solar symbol in the background. There's a star with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 points. Classic 10-pointed solar star with more abstract kind of flames licking out from that. The tips of these wands are all lotuses starting to bloom right in the center where the wands intersect. We can see they overlap. I feel like this is usually my best camera to use for this. It's probably my terrible lighting. In the center you can see another little sort of like inverted star mirroring the one around it. If you just look at this card on your own. But let's think about how we can use this kind of composition with like a stellar figure in the center and these kind of like interlocking forms, and something which feels like blooming and something which feels like a star. So I'm going to start to bring in some feedback here. It's just doing some really subtle stuff. I'm probably going to do some rotations. Oop, that's zooming, but maybe I'll want to zoom too. Do that zoom, and let's try rotating things. In order to get a more symmetrical star figure, I might want to try, let's try the horizontal symmetry there. And then, let me see if I can key some more. Maybe let's just keep it like this. Key some of these patterns out. Maybe try to get some outlines happening here. I'm going to do negative mix a little bit. Mix is the one right next to Lumikey, and this will kind of add a little bit of outlines happening. So we can see that we're getting, because negative mix sort of feels like it's a similar form to differential mixing. So you can see that what's going on in the outlines of things is this kind of like inverted effect where the color, the brightness, hue, and saturation are all kind of being averaged out with inverses of themselves, which is why we're getting these kind of like the standard inverse reaction diffusion patterns happening. And let's see what we can do to try to get some more stellation happening. I might need to add some more hue into it. I don't really want rainbows though. So I'm going to go use the hue mod and try to do some offsetting and whatnot so we get out of this rainbow, this dang old rainbow zone. I want things to be warm. I don't want them to be hot. I'm gonna add some more saturation. And let's see. There we go. That's kind of what I'm looking for. I'm going to start to add in some of the... I'm going to pull in the... Ooh. You know what? I'm going to pause this for a second and let's see if I can do something real quick. Well, I was going to try to do something to like fix up with deinterlacing and stuff and progressive scan, but I just kind of decided to do something else entirely. But yeah, so we want this kind of symmetry happening, we want some kind of stellation, and we want things to be warm. So what I'm going to try is, I still have the horizontal symmetry on, and I'm just going to try, so I've completely keyed out what's coming in. So I just kind of have like this after effect, the after image of Virtue living in the frame buffer right now. And I'm going to start to, first off I'm going to make sure that we've got Toroidal Universe switched on, and then I'm going to start to play around a little bit with rotation. So now we definitely have like a solar symbol happening. Play around with X displacement and a little bit with Y displacement. Ooh. So we have some kind of, I guess this feels more mushroomy than stellar to me. So I want to see how can I get a star shape happening in here without going into a rainbow mode. Unfortunately, I think I'm gonna have to try this invert. Let's see what happens. So we get a little bit of that. Let me just seed it with a little bit of the inverse filter. See if that's going to make any more stellation, or do we have to turn on both of these? So still don't have stellation. This is the tricky one. Probably if I had better lighting, I could use the information on here to make a star better. I really kind of like stab myself in the foot here, but I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to try to mix in just a tiny bit, and maybe I need some more rotations. Ooh, what's going on? I don't even really know what I'm doing right now. I'm just kind of like making knobs go around. I guess, you know, that's my job description. Making the knobs go around. Someone's got to do it. So that's like a fourfold symmetry. Let me just try. See if I can dial in threefold symmetry. Well, we've got, actually this one matches up well with the star in the background. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. This is a pretty good star. Whoop. So there's the stellation. Ha 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 ha. Finally got some. Ah, sorry, that was a little stroby. Yeah, I might need to put a strobe warning on this one. But yeah, so we got the Virtue. I sort of boned it on the color temperature. But you know, you work with what you got. So yeah, Virtue. Patience with yourself is a virtue. Patience with strobing video is a virtue, you know. Next we have the Priestess. So the Priestess is one of my favorite cards in this deck. In the background here is Isis, Astarte, whomever you want to name them, as sort of like the high lunar goddess. They're clothed only in light. They have this sort of like, it appears to be sort of like a headdress or crown that's behind them. I don't think that's exactly what it is, but it's like a sort of this descending series of crescents. In front of them, they have this sort of sweeping tapestry, which is more or less the veil of Maya, or like the quantum universe. It's this discrete pattern of perception that all of these intersections here and all of these threads are represent sort of like the individual strata and the individual like iotas of our perception reality. At the bottom, there's seeds, crystals, platonic solids, a camel. You know, they always say in, you know, you read the books and the things, like I read this one, and then it'll always be like, the mystery of the camel is something which we can only tell to initiates of the ninth order of A star. Usually what that means, you know, 9 times out of 10, it's like some sort of like an anal sex pun or something. If it's Aleister Crowley wrote it. Not Dion Fortune, I don't think, has written quite as many like anal sex puns as Aleister Crowley. I could be wrong. I might not be reading deep enough. Let me know in the comments if this is a mistake. Anyway, but yeah, I'm not exactly sure what the camel symbolizes in here, because everything else here is sort of like a fruit, a seed, some kind of stellation thing, some lovely icosahedron. But let's think about, what I'd like to think about is these crescents and this kind of like sweeping movement there. So let's see what we can do with that. Reset everything here. Let's start to bring in some feedback. Alright, we got this. We definitely want to have, I'm going to try this again because, so we've got this sort of sweeping movement. I probably need to displace, and we got, yeah. Actually, right now we have some nice interlacing webs. I think I want to bring this back a little bit, and I'm going to slow it down. The color space of this one is heavily blue and yellow again. Another pretty classic. Let's see if I just turn up saturation and we will get some more. And I don't want to lose the card entirely. I do like the way that this is working in here. And let's think about composition in 4-dimensional time. So composition not just in space but in time. So, of course, adding movement to things is pretty much the easiest way to get some more dynamic things happening. Slowing down the amount of delay, I turn the delay down maybe to about like 1/4 or 1/3 of the time. So if it was sped up, this is where it's at. And I didn't want 4 rainbows, I just wanted a little bit of hue shifting. There we go. So, a little bit of hue shifting, not so much rainbow. And let's slow things down again. So we have this sort of this echoing effect, which to me sort of feels like what happens very often if you try very hard. When you try very hard to be conscious of your perception, a lot of times you can end up like amplifying things that you didn't really notice were there. Like, for example, something that's fun to do on, say, a humid evening when there's a lot of moisture in the air, and it's dark out and you have like a street lamp nearby. Try to defocus your eyes, stare at the street lamp, and see how long it takes you to see this like sort of like halo of rainbow from the what do you call it? The opalescence that happens from water vapor in the air. And the more you look at it and the more you stare and the more you focus on it, the more it amplifies that kind of like rainbow thing. And that's something I tend to think about when I get to like examine the kind of slow moving color formations in a slower feedback loop. And this ties in sort of conceptually with this veil of perception that we can see in this card, that the Priestess is sort of like, the Priestess can partially be seen as a part of our brains, which is perceiving, and not just perceiving, but like taking sensory data and constructing reality out of it. So yeah, I think I'm pretty happy with how this is turning out. Honestly, this episode might be my sloppiest yet, but I'm gonna keep on at it, I guess. Alright, Priestess. Let's reset again. Whoop. The final card here is art. Hey, reset. So art in the Thoth deck was changed from temperance. So you look at like if you look at what temperance means, well, it's sort of like what we would think if you hear the word temperance nowadays. Might be like you think of like that's like a Puritan name, like that era of like Puritans, Puritans who came here because nobody in Europe wanted to deal with their kind of like insane fundamentalist religion, and then they came over here and sort of founded the over here to the North America, United States, and sort of helped found this kind of mildly awful culture of like sexual shaming that we all sort of like have to deal with in the United States. But then they'd all have names like good wife, goody, temperance, prosperity, virtue. They would be given these like very like names as though they were like everyone was taking place in this sort of thinly written allegorical play of good and evil, which I think was sort of the goal of the Puritan lifestyle, was to make your life a constant allegory for good and evil. So we sort of think of temperance and we think of like, or people who are maybe like, I think after like the Prohibition, when alcohol was legalized again, because alcohol used to be made illegal because that's how Puritan like North America, United States is. You'd have people who sort of would think of temperance as being like abstaining from substances, abstaining from indulgence, abstaining from things that only seem that are only pleasurable, that don't seem to like build anything else in you. But what temperance meant in the sort of like the original sense of temperance that it was meant for in the tarot deck was all about metalworking. I guess also, though, that to temper something, you still do that if you make a custard, if you've ever made ice cream before, or you've made lemon curd, or any kind of like a custard situation. I'm more familiar with this. I'm not really a metal worker. I do like to make pastries though. So you can't pour boiling milk into eggs, because that will just cook the eggs immediately and you'll have hot milk. So if I'm trying to make ice cream and I want to like heat up the milk and I heat up the eggs and the sugar all together, I have to like slowly pour in warm milk into the eggs in order to temper them, and I'm stirring them all of the while, and this sort of brings the eggs up to like a reasonable heat in like slowly but surely, so that once I start to keep slowly heating them together, they will cook and form a nice fluffy custard, instead of separating and being a hot steaming pile of scalded scrambled sugar eggs, which some people like. I'm not super crazy about. So temperance in that terminology means like taking two separate these two separate entities that could be like mineral or vegetal or whatever, living or mineral and vegetal, whatever I'm talking. It's like nonsense, like Crowley speak. What that means when mineral and vegetal in like the old-timey alchemical days would be like non-living or living. But bringing two kinds of substance together in order to make like something which is like a stronger union. So maybe Buckminster Fuller would have called this synergy. Synergy kind of got co-opted to mean something kind of lame a while back, but I still think synergy is a useful word, and we can kind of like leave the whole like PowerPoint generation interpretation of that terminology out of it. Wow, I'm really rambling on this one. Must be killing time because I'm probably gonna like goof up the video portion of this. But probably a Lady Frida Harris thought that art was a better way to like think about this concept for 20th century human beings in the Western world. Because not too many people understood the sort of metalworking idea of temperance, where you like temper iron with some other substances. You temper iron with more carbon. I forget what else you do to make like carbon steel. It's like layers of like water, where that's Damascus steel would be like iron and water, like at extreme heats pounded together. But you temper these metalworking. In metalworking, you temper substances and you make them stronger. But it has to be this sort of slow and careful way of mixing them together. So like the hot milk and the eggs, or like mixing together something to make whatever you use to make Damascus steel. Art seem to be a more relevant concept. If you look at art, we have this sort of visually, we have like duality, we have symmetry. Wow, it just looks terrible on this camera. Amazing. It might take me even longer to make the next episode because I actually have to like make my new studio lighting scenario and camera scenarios actually proper. But we have these sort of like it's not pure symmetry. There is like deliberate asymmetry because it's not really art, temperance, bringing things together. It's not about like making some sort of like unified symmetric whole. It's about duality and complementarity. And yeah, I think I went way too far on the tarot side of this. Let's talk more about the visual side of things. So we think about duality, and we think about complementarity, and we think about this kind of like askew symmetry. Let's think about how we can use those things together. And I'm just going to kind of ad-lib things here, like always. Let's start out with just a tiny bit of this input. Do I want to bring up the contrast some? Yes, I do. So I'm bringing up the contrast so I get some darker outlines on this. I'm going to invert saturation. And I don't want to do any rotations this time. So, in order to think about duality and sort of the skew symmetry, part of what I can do is I'm just going to add my hand a little bit here, and I want to make this a little bit askew onto this side. So we sort of have this very specifically displaced symmetry. What's happening here is, so the symmetry line is kind of right in here, and since I haven't centered, if I centered this, we'd get that kind of a thing. And if I'd sort of just pull this right off to the edge, we have this sort of framing itself off in this chunk of the world, and then we kind of have more negative space. Well, I don't know if it's negative space. We have more background from our foreground here. So I've inverted the saturation. I might want to slow things down a little bit to get some more distinct feelings. And sort of what I'm going for here is see what happens. We're going to see what happens. We have these two sort of like complementary color schemes happening here. We've got from the inverse saturation. I'm going to try and see if I can avoid... Ooh, that's looking good. I'm going to turn up saturation a lot louder so we get that to be more prominent. And what I want us to be looking at is the reaction to fusion patterns that are happening entirely because of the tension between the inversion. So as we go off to here, you know, we see when we start out here, and it's just these kind of like echoing lines from our input. We can see that the farther that they move, the farther they travel, they start to, the lines, there's a tension between the lines because they want to just be going back and forth between these two things. And at a certain point, instead of just like flipping back and forth, the inverted, the inversion in the saturation space is creating a new pattern itself, which is composed only because we have this complementary situation happening. And I'm gonna just start to like play around lightly with the Y as well, just to see kind of like what more we can do with this. probably keep moving my hand around in here because that's just seems to be a pretty reliably fun thing to do. And I'm going to start to turn up the temporal filter resonance, and I'm going to start to turn up the temporal filter more. And then once we get kind of into this temporal filter painting zone, I feel like that's where I want to be. Yeah, so if you're not familiar with temporal filter painting zone, the temporal filter, you know, we have like the inverted version, which can be nasty and stroey. We just have this pass-through because it's a multi-mode filter. And then if you crank it up all the way, you get into this, I guess, temporal filter painting mode, where it's kind of just like one form of extreme frame buffer feedback. I guess that wasn't exactly where I wanted to be. I might need to do one more thing for temporal filter painting mode to really take off. Well, interesting. Wow, I'm really rusty at this. Yeah, I don't know. You know, I'll be frank, I don't really plan these things out that much. Kind of ad-lib it. I hope that I'm jovial and charismatic enough to pull it off, even if I kind of like don't really like knock it out of the park every time. As long as I'm laughing at myself, it's like an amusing episode, though. But yeah, I think this is kind of where I want to be at with art right now. I feel very comfortable and happy with this as a zone. I like the kind of unfolding we have. We don't just have reaction diffusion patterns happening in hue space, we have them happening in the color space as well, and they're like a different set of reaction diffusion patterns. So we have the one layer of, we have sort of here, the opposing stripes is this saturation reaction diffusion, and then all over sort of and blooming out like flowers. I should have brought this in for the blooming lotuses of virtue, but I guess a blooming flower is also a pretty useful metaphor for temperance and art itself. And I'm just going to bring this out of the picture and kind of see where we go from here. Because art is ultimately about bringing things together, I want to bring these two sides together. We've lost the asymmetry because I don't kind of have anything else in the frame, and I want these two sides to meld together and see what kind of a pattern they form. Oh, this is pretty nifty. I'm going to remove the symmetry now, because we have one thing formed, and as we noted before, art was not about pure symmetry, it was about complementarity, so I didn't want to keep the entire fragment of influence from art to be totally symmetric. We're getting this slow, that pattern that we had in the middle in the hue space. It has some of its original symmetry still, but it's kind of become its own thing at this point. Tone down the saturation. We still have saturation invert on, but I've toned down the saturation gain. So instead of just inverting, what it does is kind of make it just give it more of like a slightly pastel / iridescent hue. If I turn it down all the way, then it becomes deep. Right, there's like a sweet spot in there where we get, here's where I want to be. I'll start to goof around with the hue some more. We really might have just left art behind and we're just like getting lost and having fun and things. But let's go for a little voyage. You know, the real trick of, and this is, I guess this is definitely applicable to any kind of video feedback situation, composition, but probably can be applied to many other scenarios too, is just do things really slowly. The slower you do them, the more you can, because if I just like move something a little bit here, I want to wait at least 5 seconds to see what it's going to do. Because I just move something a tiny little bit, and it'll take a second for everything to catch up with it. And if I kind of get it back to where it was, I'm going to want to let this one play out too. Just being slow and patient and not being afraid to just zone into things, I feel, is a very good method for composition. I'm not saying button mashing is not a good time too, but it's nice to have to go both ways depending on the scenario. Try to go out with an extreme zoom, but it's going to be an extreme slow zoom. Wow, this is pretty weird. Thanks for watching another episode of Video Synthesis Tarot. Might take a little minute for me to get back on schedule with these things, but hopefully I can get my studio back in shape and have some pretty decent lighting going on, so you can actually see the cards and I can actually see them too, and yeah. But as always, let me know in the comments if there's anything you'd like to see more specifically in a future episode of one of these. Let me know. At a certain point, I'm going to run out of Thoth Tarot. So, what is it, 74 cards or something? 70-something cards, and if we do 3 cards per episode, then we'll be finished up, I don't know. If I keep at this pace, it'll take me a couple of years, but I'll need to move on to something else after I'm done with that, and I'm kind of wondering if I should do another tarot deck, Or the other thing I would be thinking of would be to start. I've been interested in studying more about Taoist alchemy, maybe working with the imagery of Taoist alchemy, because I think a lot of the Western tradition of occult and alchemical Rosicrucian, all that Sufi, all that good stuff, a lot of it seems to have at least like some ancestral roots in Taoist alchemy. And yeah, it's what little I've read is very confusing and oblique, so maybe I should study it some more. It's confusing and oblique to me, and maybe I was just reading it at the wrong time. I'm sure, I'm positive that it is definitely comprehensible in some shape or form by me. Alright. Thanks a bunch for watching, and as always, have fun.